Some days they talk, some days they fight. Iran and the United States have settled into a pattern since that truce signed last month. This Wednesday in Doha, they're, I guess, sort of talking, both sides present in indirect negotiations. Whatever comes of that, the attention now shifting to Tehran, where the Islamic Republic's preparing for Friday's kickoff of 4 days of state funeral proceedings for slain Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, with the regime boasting of a growing list of foreign dignitaries, a show of strength for a leadership that's more than rebounded since Khamenei was killed on the very first day of the war. A funeral intended as a victory lap for a leadership that's, well, always revered martyrdom? Definitely. But does that mask the reality that the Iran war has resulted, perhaps, some say, in a lose-lose situation? We'll ask our panel. And with Khamenei's son and successor yet to show signs of life, who really is in charge? Are we also witnessing the funeral of a theocracy replaced instead with more of a military dictatorship? More broadly, how will the masters of Tehran deal both with a region that's working on how to bypass its chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz and a population that still has to grapple with corruption, rampant inflation, and the cruel legacy of the New Year's crackdown on protests that left untold dead or imprisoned? Today in the France 24 debate, what next after Ali Khamenei? With us, he's in Paris attending the World Congress Against the Death Penalty. Mahmoud Amiri-Moghadam, director of Iran Human Rights. Thanks for coming in from Oslo.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks as well to Kian Habibian, co-founder of We Are Iranian Students. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
From Istanbul, journalist Borzu Daragahi, author and host of the Badlands newsletter. How are you?
Good. Great to see you, Francois.
You can listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. That's a reminder. So, state media in Iran, all about the preps for Friday, like at Tehran's Grand Masala Mosque. These images courtesy of the Tasmin news agency ahead of the funeral for Khamenei. The foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, traveling to Baghdad, where niceties included photo ops with his Iraqi counterpart, and also thanks for help in organizing the funeral route after Friday to the Shia holy cities of Qom, Najaf, Karbala, and before his burial in Mashhad. As you can see, we'll ask more about our panel about that map and what is exactly the Shia heartland in 2026. Mashhad, Khamenei's hometown, also home to the Imam Reza Shrine. There's the invite list as well. Russia represented by former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Pakistan by its Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif. The list runs longer. Let me begin with you, Borzu. These preps for the funeral, how is it being painted, and how much will this moment matter in the end?
I don't think it's going to matter a lot. I think it's a necessary ceremony. They weren't able to do a funeral for him, really, not with a lot of pomp and ceremony during the war. But in many ways, and even pro-regime people acknowledge it, the smartest pro-regime people, his time has already passed, and the mantle has already been passed on to a new generation, not just his son, who has not yet appeared publicly, and we've only not even heard his voice yet, really, but also to this new generation of leaders heavily focused on the Revolutionary Guard, a little bit more relaxed about cultural issues, apparently, and a little bit more nationalistic, jingoistic even. And so his time has already passed. There have been some really smart people who I've talked to, and I've asked them, like, is this going to mean like a harsher period of rule for the Islamic Republic? And they've said kind of coyly, not necessarily, because many of the problems in Iran were because of one man. And that one man is gone now. And so you will see a little bit more creativity in the leadership's ability to operate and function and perform change.
What do you mean by creativity?
Just a little bit more inventiveness. Like, for example, allowing, for example, allowing the kids to rollerblade around Tehran and not worrying about that kind of stuff. A little bit more creativity in foreign policy, not being so adamant about which countries they'll partner with and which countries they'll make deals with. For example, there was this long-standing taboo that was imposed completely by the supreme leader about not talking to the Americans directly. This absurd thing about no meetings between Americans, no one-on-one meetings unless he approved. And now those one-on-one meetings are more and more happening, and that's something that it was frustrating for many people, including the Americans. And that taboo has been lifted, for example.
Yeah, we'll talk about those direct talks that are happening more and more. But first, Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam, I remember when Ali Khamenei's predecessor's funeral happened, Ayatollah Khamenei, and back then there were huge crowds. It was a moment that the whole world watched. Do you agree with Borzu that this will be an underwhelming spectacle in comparison?
Well, I think that they will do whatever they can to make it look big, actually, because I think it's going to be a demonstration of strength. That's their aim.
But how closely can you crop the images in the age of social media?
Yeah, but there are a lot of people in Iraq. There are people from probably other countries that can come, and I must say that because of this war, the regime actually managed to mobilize its supporters. I mean, if we think that, let's say, 15% of people in Iran actually supported regime, before the war, maybe they were sitting at home and hoping to send their children to Canada or other countries. But after the war, I think they have managed to mobilize them. So I wouldn't be surprised if there will be, large masses. But, we are talking about Iran, which is a country of more than 90 million. And the absolute majority of people in Iran don't want this regime. And they know it, and I think we know it.
But nonetheless, it will appear, at least the optics of it, you agree with that, Kiana Bibian, again, as a victory lap.
That's what they will try to do, but what's kind
certainly
of...
the regime is in a better place than it was before February 28th.
Well, on the international scale, maybe, but they didn't deal with any of their issues inside. They still can provide people with electricity, with water. And that's the crazy part to me. They cannot provide electricity, but they know how to gather their supporters. I mean, it's easy to gather people from Lebanon, Iraq, and all your neighboring countries that are supporting you and do it because Khamenei died by the end of February. We're in July, so they had time to organize that point. So it's easy to gather a lot of people. You have to put pressure on those who work in the administration. You have all the logistics with you. And the last point is that it's really easy to gather when you don't have war-grade weapons pointed at you. Right. When people come to the streets, it's where it's difficult. But when there's no threat, people come.
So again, explain for our viewers this circuit where it's the coffin will go for 4 days from Tehran to Iraq to the final resting place in Mashhad.
Yeah, I don't know about the whole process that they designed for him, because obviously they have their whole narrative about him being a martyr and for everything he apparently did for the Iranian people, which I still don't see after 47 years. They're going to bring him to the most important places for their supporters, which are in Iran and in Iraq, where most of their support is. And by the way, going to Iraq is also a difficult point for many Iranians, because between 1980 and 1988, there was a war between the two countries. So accepting this kind of relationship between the two is really hard for even some supporters of the regime, because some of them have lost loved ones in this war. So the process itself is really strange, and I think that, just like you said, they're going to try to show their force, try to show that they won, but the truth is they didn't win anything. They still have the same population that wants freedom and wants to get rid of them.
Yeah, Borzadar Guy, this visit by Iran's foreign minister this week to Iraq, which has a new government. Again, you heard Kian saying that that's going to get mixed reviews in Iran.
I don't think so. I think that having spent a lot of time in Iran and Iraq, including in Karbala, which is flooded with Iranian pilgrims, I think there's just a disconnect between a certain exile and understanding of Iran and the Iranian nation and the people and the actual salt of the earth in Iran. There's a large underclass of people who are very pious, and they go to Karbala and they go to Najaf and they go on these pilgrimages, and there's tour packages. This is the highlight of their year sometimes. So I think despite the Iran-Iraq war, there's a lot of sympathy between Iran and Iraq. And I think that, I also disagree that they have to import people from Iraq and Lebanon to fill the crowds. They astroturf Khamenei support. They tried to pretend that there was a cult of personality around him. This was the most uncharismatic person in the world. And the reason why there were so many people at Khomeiни's funeral in 1989 was because he was actually a charismatic person who had a real cult of personality around him. Khamenei's cult of personality is almost entirely fake. He didn't speak well. He was not really adored. It was just a kind of artificial support for him, kind of all around. But yet he was a cleric, a senior cleric, and he was a marjai taqlid. He was a source of emulation for pious Shia. And that's, I guess, the selling point for some people in Iraq as well as in Iran.
Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam, it took years after the death of Ayatollah Khomeini for his successor to really consolidate his power. It wasn't something that happened overnight. Now we began the show all wondering aloud what is the real situation with his chosen successor, Moshtan, his son, who was wounded in that February 28th attack. Will he have, if he does recover, or if another cleric takes this place, will it stay a theocracy the way it's been since 1979? Or is the power now gravitating towards the Revolutionary Guards and away from the clerics?
Well, first of all, we really don't know where Moshtaba is and how he is. Nobody has, at least they haven't shown him. We haven't heard his voice. But since Khamenei became a supreme leader, I think he managed to build up a parallel power structure, parallel to all other institutions in Iran, and he has given the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, tremendous power, not only militarily but also economically. They have been basically controlling most of the private sector in Iranian economy, in the oil sector. So it's become a huge institution that has the arms and has the money. And so now I think what will happen is that, until in the recent years, they have had a lot of power, but maybe more behind the scene. Now maybe they will have more power in front of the scene. But I think that, what decides which direction this regime goes is it depends on how much they manage to solve people's daily problems. Because as Kian said, the main threat for the existence of the regime is Iranian people, who don't want the regime, not American or Israeli bombs. So, and the problem is also, on one side, you have a repressive regime, but the main issue is that it's also highly corrupt and incompetent in solving people's daily problems. So if they don't manage to solve daily problems, as it was said, water, electricity, the inflation, unemployment, then they will have to just intensify the repression, because that's how they can hold on to power, by repressing more, by using death penalty as, that's the area where we are working, and that's what they have been doing during this time of war. While attention of the whole world was on the war, they have been intensifying the repression executing protesters, arresting thousands of people inside the country. But who comes and who gets what kind of role? It all it's unclear. But I think a guess would be that IRGC would have more and more control and power.
More and more control and power. Lots to unpack in what you just said there. First of all, let's begin with the IRGC. What can we see more front and center, sort of like there was the former head of the Quds commanders, Qasem Soleimani. He was kind of front and center, and he was killed by the Americans. Do you see someone like his current, the one who currently holds that job, kind of taking over, kind of a military coup situation, or?
No, Connie.
I think that given the things that we're seeing and that we saw for the past decades, I think the RGC already took over the country. I mean, when you control the economy, you control everything in a dictatorship.
And who's in charge? Is it the IRGC commander, or is it the head of the Quds force?
That's really hard to see, because you have the set of people that you see on TV, all those people who make the declarations, but then you have the branch, let's say, in the shadow, those who have the control of the main companies. And these people operate behind closed doors. They don't show themselves because all they want is to keep control of the economy. They don't really care about being recognized in the street or being amplified by other supporters. And so, yeah, therefore, I think that they already have tremendous power. If they didn't take over yet, they're very close to it. And it is still unclear, but we also know that they might have played a role in the election of Mojtaba Khamenei as new supreme leader. We know that Mojtaba was really close to Soleimani before his death, and that he still had very close ties with the IRGC. So there's little doubt about the weight that they have in the regime. But the second point is what weight and what capability they have in the country, and it is close to none, because the country is still under heavy sanctions. The population is fed up with them. They are traumatized by what happened in January. And that's what actually matters. We are activists for human rights. We only care about civilians. And we try to put the spotlight on them, because the analysis is, yeah, sure, interesting. And earlier we were talking about creativity, which, sorry to say that, but sounds crazy to me. If it would be coming from a country that massacred 36,000 people within 48 hours. So I really don't see what they can do. And one last point, because the term was mentioned earlier about exile. I did not choose to be in exile. I did not choose to be away from my family. I have been forced, because there is an entity called the IRGC and the Islamic Republic who is threatening everyone in Iran. Nobody in this world is exiled by choice. So that is also an important point. And the only way I have personally to maintain that link with my country, with my family, with my friends, is through activism. So we try our best to get the informations we want to get and share it to the world, because there is always a shortage of information on the matter.
Professor Dargahi, again, this question of who's running the show right now.
Well, I think there's a transparency there that you can point to. The Supreme National Security Council, which is this body that includes the heads of the IRGC, the Ministry of Intelligence, the head of Parliament, the presidency, etc. There are those shadow figures. There is this Algeria-like aspect to Iran, where you have these shadowy figures who are scattered around, but the real power is in the Supreme National Security Council, and they're the ones who are making most of the huge decisions of state. I think the important thing right now, and that's kind of interesting, is that I don't think that Iran is moving in the direction of theocracy. And I think that that is probably a better thing. I think that the IRGC is a little bit exaggerated how bad it is. I think that there is an element of the IRGC that is involved in clandestine overseas operations, and that is why it's called a terrorist organization. But I don't think it's any different than, for example, Sisi's military in Egypt or any of the other military regimes around. It doesn't have any more scope than China's military does in China. So I think that risk making a mistake by taking this organization and IRGC this, IRGC that, 36,000, et cetera. We don't know the numbers. The best numbers that I have for those 2 days are 7,000. But in any case, I would say that the most dangerous and the worst aspect of Iran right now is not actually the IRGC. It's actually the judiciary, which is the one that is responsible for those death penalties that the other guest was talking about. And also the one institution that's completely impervious, or not maybe completely, but very impervious to the cultural changes that are sweeping through Iran. So whereas, the IRGC guys become sort of normalized and are part of society, it's the clergy that dominate the judiciary and those judiciary institutions that live in cloistered environments. And they're the ones who are now the main stumbling block to Iran making any kind of real significant change without regime change.
Mahmoud Amiri Moghazam, it really is sort of three parts: the judiciary / clerics, the other people inside the leadership, the civilians, if you will, and the soldiers, the IRGC ones.
Well, I think what happened after this war is that it revived the idea of that this regime can be reformed. I think this is why I think it was a good thing. You say the lose-lose situation. I believe that right now, what happens after this war, Iranian peoples, the civil society, they were the main losers because the regime has become more resilient. Some of the leaders are gone, so now they can sign an agreement with President Trump. They couldn't do if Khamenei was alive. However, we should keep in mind that we are talking about a regime that, despite their differences, they have been together in whatever has happened in the last 47 years. This is the same regime. And there is one principle which is holy that Ayatollah Khamenei used to say that it's holier than the Holy Quran or Islam, and that's to preserve the system. So to preserve the system, they can do whatever it takes. And I think that, making a distinction between IRGC and the clergy, it's a bit artificial. It's the same system.
All right, let's talk about, because again, you're here in Paris for a conference against the death penalty. Let's talk about this system. The homepage of your organization, Iran Human Rights, keeps count of the number of executions in Iran since the start of the year. I looked at the page earlier, it was 363. Among those on death row, you flagged the case of the Nikbat brothers, accused of something called corruption on earth. Tell us about them, first of all.
Yeah. So you see, the judiciary in Iran is not independent. So we have revolutionary courts, and there are some charges that they use against people. These are vague charges. So basically, any of us three can be charged for corruption on earth because it's up to the judge.
What does that mean, corruption on earth?
It's a terminology that they have taken from Sharia. It basically means that you do something that is wrong in such an extent that a Sharia judge considers it as corruption on earth. So let's say if I'm taking because of this website, and they say that this website is a lie, so they say that, okay, the extent of number of lies is so big that it amounts to corruption on earth.
You say these three brothers are political prisoners. Explain.
Well, you see, like many other cases, these three brothers, actually, we have very little information. What we know is that they were arrested because they resisted confiscation of their land. They were arrested, and then later they were facing charges of corruption on earth. What we know that they have been politically active before. Some years ago, they called for a referendum to change the system, but just peaceful means. And then now they are sentenced to death. And then the third brother was recently arrested. He's a Christian convert. And he is also facing charges that can be punishable by death. But you know, they are not unique. We have heard in the last couple of months about hundreds of people who have been arrested. According to official numbers, several thousand were arrested during the war. Many of them are facing charges that can be punishable by death, and death penalty, it's the main instrument of creating fear in order to hold on to power, because a regime that cannot solve people's daily problem and that does not have legitimacy among people can only hold on to power by creating fear.
Kian Habibian, again, we saw the same pattern as with the Women Life Freedom protests of 2023. Protests end, and suddenly the numbers of people executed spikes. Tell us about what's happened in 2026 in Iran.
Well, this year was really hard to track because we had a first internet shutdown in January, then we had a second one, which was actually the longest nationwide internet blackout in history. So it was really hard to get in touch with the people inside. And even when you have internet, it is heavily filtered and the connection is so low that most of the people cannot communicate. There are also other people who are connected but don't dare to share the news. So that's the first one. It is really hard to get information from inside. And I think that it's been a long time, but especially since the beginning of 2026, Iranians have been through hell. They took the streets by numbers that most of Iranians say, I cannot even describe what I was saying. Most of them are saying, I've never seen such a crowd in the streets. Most of them were truly believing in their capacity to overthrow the regime with this movement. And what they saw after, so the pictures of the body bags that you could see everywhere, the blood left on purpose in the street to traumatize people, just like you were saying, they rule by fear. And now the Iranian people are stuck in a situation where life is too expensive. They don't know where to look up to. They don't even know what to expect. And that's really hard because at the same time you have all these international things happening, all these negotiations. They don't know what's going to happen next. But in Farsi, and I just got reminded of a professor who is in prison now, who was saying in Farsi, "Zendegi zende nist." Life is not alive anymore in Iran. People don't know what to do, except if you're a supporter of the regime and if you get fed by the RGC or the clerics, which is to me the same thing because they live together. There's nothing to look up to for Iranians.
Now, again, the spark for those New Year's protests was inflation. That mass inflation continues. The rial, the currency, continues to slide to record lows. Officially in December at the time, this was the official number, inflation stood at 52.6%. The latest official tally, this is an official number, the real number is probably higher, say economists, 88.6%. So the inflation continues to rise. Now, Kian Habibian, if there is, out of the hat, pulled some deal that means an easing of sanctions, will that be a good thing for the citizens of Iran? Will it mean the end of this inflation?
I'm not sure that it will mean the end of the inflation. Part of my job besides activism is economy and strategy. And you cannot just revive an economy because the sanctions are lifted. Your currency has collapsed. Most of your banks, smaller banks, are collapsing one by one. And even if you have the sanctions gone, the prices don't immediately go down. You still have logistics problems, all these things that the regime didn't address in the past 47 years. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen. One thing that we know is that first the RGC and the regime, whatever you want to call it, is going to ensure its own survival. So the money is going to go to them first. And if they think that their survival would be higher, the chance of them surviving would be higher if they be more gentle on the people on the economic point of view. Maybe they will give some things, but you have so many logistical problems, so many factories that are not working, so many people that are not getting paid, that you cannot just fix it by, waving up the sanctions.
Waving off the sanctions. Borzu Dargahi, we saw back in January after a week of the internet shutdown. Oh, they can't keep it shut for long. After all, the economy can't run without it. And it continued.
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
That the regime is determined to stay in power and that it saw the internet as a security threat. On those sanctions, I just want to say that there is actually a kind of test case that you can look at how the effect of sanctions impacts society and civil society. Between 2013 and 2017, there was it was the Rouhani term, and there was an easing of sanctions under Obama and the JCPOA. And what you had in Iran was the launch of startups, a lot of internet companies, a lot of the internet companies that are there now, like the equivalent of the Uber that's in Iran or the Amazon, the platform for shopping and so on. All those launched during that period when the sanctions were eased, when the economy was doing a little bit better. And you also had a flowering of civil society there, youth culture. That's when this TikTok generation that took to the streets in 2022 for the women, life, and freedom movement, that's when they arose. So, and then when Donald Trump came and imposed maximum pressure, sanctions were up again, the economy was strangled again, you had basically a shutting down of that phenomenon. No more startups, no more interesting things happening in civil society. So I think that actually you give a little bit of economic breathing space to the country. Yes, of course, there's corruption. I lived in the Middle East for the last 25 years. I don't think there's any part of this whole region that's not completely corrupt thoroughly. But still, people make ends meet. They try to do the best that they can. And when there is these sanctions, that crushes the middle class and it prevents a flowering of civil society. So if in retrospect, based on the experience of the last 15 years or so, if you want the people to rise up, if you want a civil middle class society to emerge from the ashes of the Islamic Republic, I think it probably would be better if the sanctions were eased.
All right, but we don't. Of course, it's the future's unwritten as to whether or not that will happen. Just a final word on this, Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam. In your daily work, how much do you look at, even when the internet is at a near standstill, some messages are still getting out. It's a genie that you can't put back in the bottle. How do you work in terms of how do you use your looking at timelines out of Iran?
You see, I think that what has happened now probably can create an opportunity for our future, for Iranian people's future. Now, as the other guests say, that the regime is trying to survive, and of course, removal of sanctions might ease the daily life, but it's not going to be sustainable because of the corruption, because of the repressive nature and incompetent nature of the regime. However, I think at the present moment, the regime will try to improve its relations to the European Union. And EU has an opportunity to put the issue of human rights on the table, on the agenda, because now I think everybody in Iran sees that this war was not about Iranian people's rights or their situation. They see it, there is no conditions about Iranian people in this deal, but EU can actually make a difference here. And I hope that when European countries, France, EU, want to upgrade their relations with the Islamic Republic, they put conditions that are about Iranian people.
But do those work, especially now that we're beginning to have these direct talks between the United States and Iran?
Well, I mean, these direct talks, whatever they are about, I think the main issue of these direct talks are going to be the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear issue. I haven't seen an indication that actually situation of Iranian people is part of these talks. But
and isn't that great for the regime?
It is great for the regime, but the regime's main problem is millions of Iranians that do not want this regime because the regime is repressive and corrupt. But so that's why they will try to get, to upgrade their relations with the rest of the world. And I think that's when the EU can put conditions. I mean, we can call it whatever we want, but Iranian people's situation, their rights, use of the death penalty, political prisoners must not be left out of any engagement. I believe that if we are looking for a sustainable peace and stability, we must think long term, and a democratic Iran is actually the solution that can provide this sustainability. But that comes from within, by Iranian people, but international community can help by easing the situation, by trying to push for improvement of human rights.
Okay, it was France's president that opened that conference against the death penalty that brought Mahmoud here to Paris. Still, though, how much sway do the French, the Germans, Germany, which has a large Iranian community, and other countries have when the United States is now dealing directly, and they're mostly dealing, in the words of Mahmoud himself, over oil issues in the Strait of Hormuz? It's more transactional, shall we say?
Yes, I think it is, because given the points discussed between the US and the regime, it is, I think, clear that the EU doesn't have any role to play in this discussion. But in general, just like you were saying, they can play a role for civil society. The problem with Europe right now is that they're not consistent on their position. I mean, one day you have the High Representative of Foreign Affairs of the EU who is saying that the Islamic Republic is not legitimate. The next week they're shaking their hands. You have Macron saying that he's condemning what's happening, but then he said that I talked to Pezeshkian on the phone. So the problem is...
But you can condemn and speak with the other person. That's what you don't... Diplomacy is also about speaking to...
Yeah, but diplomacy works
rivals.
when you talk to a legitimate government, not with a government that violates every human right.
So they shouldn't be speaking at all to the...
Well, given what happened in January, and even before, let's take women life freedom, let's take 2019, 2009, 99, we have so many episodes of trauma for Iranians. You can also act the fact that they're not legitimate anymore and activate to your responsibility to protect, or the fact that you're one of the most democratic country of the world, that you're the country of human rights, to engage something different with the civil society. But that's something that has not been tried by any country. And right now we still have this position where we don't know where Europe is standing on the topic. And what we want from these countries is to have a clear position on the civil society. That is the only thing that remains true every time.
Did you get a sense of that, Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam, at the conference you've been attending in Paris?
Well, I mean, most of the participants at the...
Because we had the French president, again, there. Did he mention Iran?
The French president, unfortunately, didn't mention Iran, but there were French foreign minister, Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs.
Jean-Noël Barrot.
Yeah, he mentioned Iran. He said that Iranian brothers and sisters will not be forgotten. So I take it as a good sign, but I think that, it's not only about what we say in the conference, but I think, again, if we are really thinking long-term, any engagement must be about Iranian people and their rights, because that's the only solution that can actually give sustainable peace and stability. A country that executes, last year they executed 4 to 5 people every single day. A country like this, a country that shoots thousands of its citizens on the street, cannot be a long-lasting partner for peace and stability. So we need to think long-term, and I think the most important factor here is let's say, if they have 10% of the population, at least 70 million Iranians. That's a very powerful partner that we can have in the long term. But any engagement must be about Iranian people's rights. And I hope that when EU wants to upgrade its relations, stop, a moratorium on use of the death penalty and release of all political prisoners can be a condition, and it is possible.
All right, we hear that call. Borzu Daragahi, there's the Europeans on the one hand, who've also offered their services in helping to demine the Strait of Hormuz and reduce tensions there. We had the visit of the Sultan of Oman here to Paris this week. Over in Doha, those indirect talks have just concluded. It's anyone's guess how indirect they are. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance telling journalist Sohrab Amhari on the plane returning from negotiations with the Iranians in Switzerland that channels were opening. This is what he said. He said, quote, they were like, talking about the Iranians, okay, fine, we'll send somebody from the IRGC to go, hang out in Doha with somebody from CENTCOM, and that's how we're going to settle a lot of these disputes. But of course, the disputes that he's talking about, Borzu, are not the ones that Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem is that for the Europeans, they've basically sanctioned themselves out of leverage over Iran, and they're also making deals with the most gory, most awful regimes on the planet. So I don't think that they have a lot of credibility, especially when you look at how cozy the Europeans and the Americans are with Israel. So when they talk about human rights, people just ignore them at this point. So it becomes about power and about interests. And that on that level, the United States and Iran can engage, and the Europeans and Iran can engage. Although on the level of even interests, the Europeans have made so many mistakes with regard to Iran that basically everyone ignores them. And this whole issue about the demining and so on, even the Americans don't take that seriously, much less the Iranians. So I think that the way forward at this point is to just let Iran be. And if you want to talk about its human rights record, its horrible human rights record, do so in a way that's not hypocritical and weaponized in a way that is supposedly aimed at helping the Iranian people, but really aimed at covering up the crimes of other regimes in the region. So I think that that would be helpful for the Europeans and Americans. That would be a course that they could take. But when it comes to interests and hard power, this is right now the only, at this point, sadly, the only way that there can be any kind of progress with regard to Iran relations.
Kian Habibian, right now, what are friends and family inside Iran telling you?
Well, just like I was saying before, it is hard to get in touch with some of them, mostly because of their age and they don't really know how to get a VPN to connect with us. The younger ones and the students we're in contact with, some of them and most of them are focused on the exams coming up because they still have to survive, so they still have to pass the exams and try to hope for a better future. Most of them are also telling us about the price of everything going up, and for those who don't have a job, for those who have a small job, it is really hard to follow. So because they're resilient people, they rely on each other and they care for each other inside. And so yeah, but what's also, I think, touching and takes me, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't get the word in English, but
Heartening.
yeah, we were worried about what was happening to them inside after what they went through. But every time they call us, every time we have them on the phone, the first thing they say is, don't worry about us. And I still cannot believe how these people can say that after what they've been through. No matter the scenario that we discussed, they have seen people being killed, they have heard bombs, they have high prices, they don't have air, they don't have water, they don't have electricity. But the first thing they tell me when they call me is, don't worry about us. They are telling me that. I'm in a democratic country where my life is not threatened on a daily basis, but they're the ones saying that. And maybe it's enough, but it's really hard to imagine how resilient and brave they are. So that only forces us to do more for them, to be closer to them, to find ways to help them, because that's what only matters in these discussions. I don't really care about all the scenarios depicted here. I only care about the people, and I really want them to enjoy a free and normal life.
And we'll live with that thought about the resilience of the Iranian people. Kian Habibian, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam for being with us. Borzadar Gahi for joining us from Istanbul. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.